Admiral, if I may exercise the rights of the chairman and ask the first question. In my remarks, I noted that the former head of the Mossad thinks that Prime Minister Netanyahu would like to carry out attacks on the Iranian nuclear program. Can you tell us, in your judgment, whether that could be successful and what the results of it might be?
Well, I didn't see the quote and no idea what else may be out there. This issue has been bandied about for a number of years now, and I think it's the wrong question to be asking, the wrong topic to be focusing on. The more of this kind of talk about can we attack, should they attack, should they, it just gets people hyped up and spun up. Most of them don't know what they're talking about, and it just ignores a lot of fundamentals that people just choose to either pick selectively out and highlight or completely blow off the table. And so the most fundamental questions are, I think, for folks in leadership positions in Washington and Tel Aviv, if I might try to extend it and wouldn't even begin to really speak for them, but is what's really going on? You know, what's the objective? That's been the question. Is this, are they building a bomb? Are they really kind of vastly expand their electrical capability? And I think the answer is we don't know. And I suspect that from Tehran, their desired objective is ambiguity. Let's keep them guessing for some obvious reasons. To admit outright is to just ask for attention they probably don't want to get, and to deny is kind of difficult in view of some of the things that are going on. But the fact of the matter is we don't know. And whether first of all, from my military experience, the idea of a military strike, as in, I think people have this idea that, you know, we're going to launch a couple of airplanes, a couple of missiles, and poof, some things are going to go away. And I think that's probably that idea, that mindset is fostered by events back several decades ago when the Israeli Air Force conducted a very specific raid against a very easily identified small point target and had great success. That is a very different situation in Iran today. But there are some other realities here, and that is that the relative capability of, if you want to just look at the military realm, U.S. military power, Iranian military power, there is really no comparison. And so that's not a fruitful area to debate. It's pretty stupid, in my opinion. Even more off the mark, because we ought to be trying to focus on other things. And military power is an aspect of national power, one aspect. We in the U.S. have learned some tough lessons here in recent years by the widespread application of this particular tool to many problems, with results that are decidedly mixed. So I think there's a recognition on the part of many, certainly in this country, that we have a lot of things that can be brought to bear, and we ought to be doing that. But again, backing out of this to some overriding realities. Number one reality is this country is intensely focused on its domestic challenges right now. And in my opinion, if we don't get them straight as a tax-paying American citizen, if we don't get this, it ought to be the top priority, and we need to do something serious about getting it straight. And then, in my opinion and experience, a lot of these problems around the world are relatively minor compared to this. But unfortunately, in this ongoing debate of U.S.-Iranian relations, people have been highly selective in picking the topic, issue they'd like to highlight. And of course, with 30 years of hate and discontent, vitriol, rocks back and forth, every kind of ugliness, it's not too hard to pick out a long list of things to buttress one's opinion. Got it. We're going to make progress when we decide we want to make progress. Part of that is the timing of the agenda. realities, other realities, and we ought to try to make some time as we can. And so I think we've got some people, certainly in our government, certainly others around the world that are interested. And at the end of the day, it's going to have to be, takes two to tango here. So there's going to have to be outreach from both places. But the military thing is grossly hyped, overhyped, very disproportionate, ought not be the focus of attention. We ought to be spending a fraction of that time on something useful, and we might get somewhere. Okay? Ambassador Miller. Oh, can I do this? Or you're going to be, you're the moderator. Sorry. Ambassador, I did it. You're up.
Admiral, when you were in your command,
there's a microphone. And also introduce yourself, if you may.
Do we have any walk-around mics or anything?
Yeah, there's
Oh, there's a stand-up mic. Okay.
Admiral, when you were head of CENTCOM, one of the major issues was ship traffic in the Persian Gulf. And you had to have direct contact with the Iranian Navy. Could you describe the nature of the engagement that you had with the Navy, and how would you rate the success of the engagement, recognizing that this is a very limited activity, but it was a dangerous one, it is a dangerous one, and the importance of having civilized contact between the navies is obvious. I'd appreciate your comments on that activity and how it might be broadened to include other areas of military concern.
Well, thanks, Ambassador. And as a true experienced diplomat with a lot of knowledge about this area in the region, he's thrown a hand grenade at me, because I could spend a half an hour talking about that particular question and many issues that are related to it. First of all, just to again get expectations back in the box, the engagement, if you would, between the Navy, between the U.S. Navy and Iranian military forces was, I would characterize as professional, daily, routine, just ships passing. But there's an experience that I have, and that is that in the business of relations among nations, and in whatever aspect, military or economic or whatever, one of the easier ways to actually engage in a non-confrontational way is at sea. Because sailors around the world share a lot of things in common. This medium upon which we sail and operate is rather alien to humans. Not too many folks here demonstrated an ability to walk on water lately, so there's a sense of shared responsibility that's manifested every day, and people of often very polar opposite ideologies and feelings that will help people in trouble on the sea. And in my military experience, whenever we wanted to try to get something going, if you would, between erstwhile potential combatants or others with whom we didn't enjoy great relations, it was always easier to do it at sea, because you didn't have somebody's turf to worry about. So this is my land, and we're going to do things my way because we're here. And if we were back on your turf, we do it. So at sea, essentially everybody owns it, nobody owns it, and so it's much easier to deal at sea as a background. In the Gulf, you have some immediate application of national interests, ideology, preference, economic interests, military, you name it. It's a long list of things. The U.S. has, as I mentioned earlier, not been in this region for very long historically, 60-some years in good measure. But it's been a continuous presence since back in the 1940s. And the reason for that is because we have a lot of interest here. Although the U.S. of itself doesn't draw a great percentage of its oil and gas resources from this region, its allies and friends do. And frankly, with the interrelated economies of the world, whether it's us or whether it's the Japanese or the Koreans or the Europeans or whomever, repercussions ripple pretty quickly. So it's in our interest to be attentive to this region. And I could have a 10-minute list of other issues. We're there. We're not likely to leave. That isn't appreciated by the Iranians, certainly. That's been dramatically stated numerous times. You guys should go away. Things will be much better if you're not here. Fine. They hit me with that one through intermediaries a couple times and said, sorry, we're not leaving. We're here. We're going to stay. But the fact that we're here is for reasons that we think are pretty good ones. We are there because we want the region to be stable for a host of reasons. You know, none of us need oil except those that are pumping it out of the ground at $100 or more a barrel. We depend on this. We'd like not to, but until technology and political will helps out, we're kind of where we are. But back to the issue at hand. Whenever you have military units in close proximity, you'd like to have a series of expectations when we meet. And this is well established around the world between navies. A series of protocols. So when ships pass, day or night, there's certain recognition, honors, if you would, given, deference, based on the individuals in command of those ships. Very interesting. Those that have some understanding of the Navy can appreciate this. It's actually pretty good because, in my opinion, for a lot of ways. Because around the world, there's a common set of behaviors that people come to expect. And normally, most maritime mariners adhere to these. It's been a change in the Gulf. The Iranian Navy, my experience, very professional. Used to follow these guidelines pretty regularly, and our people felt reasonably comfortable. No reason to feel discomfort when we ran into these elements. The problem for us lately is that the IRGC has kind of muscled in. Again, we don't understand all the dynamic in Tehran. All we can see is the manifestation of that. And what we see is the IRGC more frequently than ever being the contact point. And they don't behave in the expected ways. And in fact, they've been challenging in some respects. So the U.S. tries to be quite attentive to conducting operations in the Gulf, for example, strictly in accordance with international law. And so our transits of contested, busy, and crowded waterways like the Strait of Hormuz follows exactly the international rules through the channels. We know what side of the channel to be on. We know when to turn, and so forth. Now, the problem is when you get people who don't follow the rules. And whenever you're in a position like this, people get nervous. And on several occasions, while I was the commander, we had some shooting out there. It was absolutely unnecessary. This kind of potential is not good. And so there are ways to deal with that. The best way, in my experience, is to have a dialogue between the parties. You may not have a national agreement on things, but there can be ways to agree so that people can, when they pass each other, get in close proximity. They don't have to love each other, but they can expect to follow certain procedures, and I think that would alleviate these concerns. But it's difficult to get these things started. U.S. Navy individual ship commanders are not authorized to conduct policy in the region. Can't just drop into Bandar Abbas, for example, or Bushehr and say, hey, we're here to talk about a new regime. How do you like this proposal? You know, much as I would think it might be useful sometimes. So it's for the higher levels. But back to your point. The business of the navies, for many years, in fact, I think the truth of the matter is there was more dialogue between the U.S. Navy and the Iranian Navy than any other combined arms of the respective governments. And most of the time it resulted in things being generally pretty peaceful in the area. potential is certainly could go both ways, but it'd be nice to just have expectations met. Okay. Ma'am? And I'll work my way around.
Barbara Slavin from the Atlantic Council. Admiral Fallon,
Barbara?
good to see you again. When you left government, it was widely reported that the main reason was because you were concerned about the possibility of a U.S. or Israeli attack on Iran. What is your sense now, given everything that's going on in the world? You alluded to economic problems, U.S. involved in 3 wars and so on. What percentage would you give to the possibility of any kind of attack on Iran during the remainder of President Obama's term? Thanks.
Little chance, I would think, but no idea. And let me put this back in context. So the problem was, and still is, until recently, when other events have kind of overshadowed things, this just incessant focus on conflict. That was my issue. And it was much more about the continued media hyping, and they had lots of help, by the way, from many sectors, to try to keep this issue alive and well. And so political leaders are going to react to, they'll take the bait. And so you throw something like that on the table, there's a way to get an angle somewhere, people are going to jump on it. There's not much good to be served by it. So I have no idea. And I think most prognosticators probably failed pretty miserably in anticipating what's going on here in many countries in the last 6 months, so what would make me any better at divining the future? What I can say is that we ought to be working pretty hard to focus on other things that would have us in a different place. Okay? Ma'am.
I'm Shireen Hunter, and from Georgetown University. Thank you very much, Admiral Fallon, for your presence here and your comments. If I may be so bold as to suggest a couple of other factors that might have contributed to the continuing problems in U.S.-Iran relations, and see what your thinking on that is. One of the things that I think really has been maybe the unfortunate thing that I don't want to say that the collapse of Soviet Union was unfortunate, but the timing might have been unfortunate. I think that the collapse of the Soviet Union changed very much the dynamics of regional relations, and particularly the perception of Iran. In general, in international relations, an established fact is that the great powers are always uncomfortable with larger regional powers. And this has nothing to do with the nature of governments. This has to do, we had problems with France, for instance, under General de Gaulle, even though we were NATO allies. So I would say that some of the fact that the relations with US got worse, actually, after the 1989 and certainly after 1990-91 was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the creation of a whole set of things. One of the outcomes of this was that many of US regional allies felt that their value for US has gone down. And it had gone down, whether it was Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and so on. When you don't have a Soviet Union wanting to come to the Persian Gulf, I think that you have to find some other justification. And this was that, for example, even in 1989, Egypt and all the Arab countries were dead set against any reconciliation between Iran and US, and this has been documented, including by one of the United Nations Secretary General's envoy to Iran. The other thing that I find it very interesting is that, and so it became very useful to find a focus, and of course Iran played into this because of reasons that has been explained with its rhetoric and so forth. But the other thing that I also find nevertheless interesting is that there hasn't been enough appreciation within the US policy community that there has been much more asymmetry of interest between U.S. and its regional allies. For example, a case in point is Pakistan and Afghanistan. By not having relations with Iran, we actually have given a monopoly rent to Pakistan, and they have basically bled us financially and otherwise. The same thing is with the whole Shia issue and Saudi Arabia. I wonder, for instance, our interest, let's say in Bahrain, is really the same as that of Saudi Arabia. The majority of Bahrainis are Shias, and we have our fifth tree. So I'm wondering if there is anyone that actually in government is thinking about this thing. My feeling is that we are acting as if we are still in this sort of the Cold War thing. And the same Cold War mindset is still. Iran has won from the changes in the Middle East. US has lost. Well, and we don't see on the basis of what standards. So this is more in the sort of a comment thing, but obviously I would very much appreciate your insight, which are much greater than mine.
Where would I start with that list?
Anywhere you want. Anywhere you want, because you know this, but what I mean is that we are acting in a totally different international and regional setting, but some of the things we are not looking at.
Doctor, I got it. Okay. So let me pick a couple of these thousands of cherries that you've popped out on the tree. The demise of the Soviet Union, sure, huge effect. Things were pretty well defined, and it was relatively easy to pick your side, and things played out. And then suddenly, gone, poof. And so everybody scurried off to look after other things. But the world's continuously changing, so I could come up with a list doubly the length of your list of other things going on in the world that had little to do with events around Iran. But I'll tell you what, you hit on one that I think is very fundamental here, and it's one that's sometimes kind of ducked, and that's the Shia-Sunni issue. It's, in my opinion, a big deal, and I'm not sure that it should be, but it is. And the deal is this, in my opinion, that the Sunni majority countries in the region are nervous. Why? Iran, the majority Shia country. Iraq, right next door, with 60% or so Shia, with a government that's Shia-led right now. And so certainly back several years ago, almost without exception, every leader in the region came to me and expressed anxiety over this. And anxiety was, what are we going to do with these guys? Those guys being Iran, Iraq, now one, and it's them against us. What are you guys thinking about? I would think to myself. Okay, take this in a measured way there, Admiral. What I think the real deal is, fundamentally, is concern because you have a decidedly minority in the world, Shia Islamic group, that in fact has its primary power focus in Iran today. So traditionally, and I'm open to your comments and criticisms here, the Shia minority in the Islamic world have felt like minorities, put upon, discriminated against, you pick your adjective, but I think that's undeniable from my opinion. Now, you have a resurgent Iran, has a history of being a great power, at least in the region, and this is disconcerting. Combine that with a potential to have a country that was probably the most powerful military state in the region back a decade or so ago, Iraq, and holy mackerel, this is pretty troubling, I think, to many of the leaders. That's a real fundamental issue here. Stated in other terms, often, I think, but it's just the reality, one of the realities I see. Not surprising to me at all that the leadership in Bahrain, leadership in Riyadh, looks at the demographics in Bahrain and goes, ooh, numbers count. And so how could this influence events? And so the anxiety factor ratchets up. Bahrain is a very complex issue, tough issue for the U.S. A couple things that make it very difficult for us to just say, hey, what are you guys thinking about? I think Crown Prince is in town today, if I'm not mistaken. Prince Salman. You ought to know better. On the other hand, this is the one country that has consistently invited the U.S. to be present in the region above all others. Tiny little country, have invited us to have a presence there that has been enabled us to at least be around, to have some influence. And we have a facility there, a fleet headquarters today. Kind of tough to deal with that one. But I think the reality of big power politics in the world is that it's kind of like somebody told me, former Secretary of Defense in this country told me that dealing with the U.S. is kind of like sleeping with a hippopotamus. You know, when it flops around, better not be underneath it. It's just difficult to deal with something this big, no matter how much waxing or waning we think things are. We have a huge influence. So in the Cold War, it was pretty easy. Them against us. Pick your side, and both sides trying to. Now it's much more diffuse, much more complex, and that's a reality. And here's the big deal, the biggest issue in my experience in this town. You start totaling up the issues that are in front of the leadership. It's endless. There are not enough hours in the day to do justice to all the things that are bubbling all the time. So go back to that time. I had high hopes after the Gulf War in '91 that, boy, look at this tremendous amalgam of folks that came together to actually move in one direction. Pretty shocking. Now, how do we leverage this to get some real progress in things like on the Levant with Israel and the Palestinians? I thought, wow, we got an opportunity here. But what happened? Other things. The Balkans started to come apart, aided and abetted by some really poor decisions by leaders, I think, in and out of that region. Anyway, things kind of spun out of control. So lots of factors here, and big challenge today is so many things on the plate that this is, again, just one of them, and unless there's something that kind of nudges the ball forward, and who knows what it might be, whether it's events that are spinning out of this unrest or whatever. So, go ahead. I'll go to the back next.
Good morning, and thank you for your remarks.
Sure.
I'm Murad Iqbal. I am the former Deputy Director of the Center for International and Comparative Law at the University of Baltimore, now with the Reese Institute and Plasmera Technologies, LLC.
Mm-hmm.
I have a particular question for you. In your remarks and the answers you've given to the questions, what thoughts do you have to citizen contacts? Because our expectations to our government as a whole tend to rise, and as much as they rise, our government's capacity to deal with all of those expectations tends to diminish. I'll give you one small perspective. In 2007, I had the privilege of drafting a memorandum of understanding between the University of Tikrit School of Law and the University of Baltimore School of Law, which was the first memorandum of its kind to be signed on the very day that the United States was trying to usher a rapprochement between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Annapolis.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts? What can citizens do
Okay.
on a citizen-to-citizen contact in this
Got it.
regard?
My feeling on this one is very strong, that in complex issues such as this, they are best attacked from both the top and the bottom. So having leadership, political and otherwise, work top down to try to get fundamental issues framed and resolved is absolutely essential. But at the same time, that can be immeasurably aided or hindered, and we would hope the former, by common citizens, individuals, working things from the bottom. I don't care whether it's the situation we found in Iraq in 2006 when things looked like they were really headed south. I give you lots of examples of how engagement at the top and the bottom collectively moved towards a much brighter sunshine. And I think this is the case in just about every situation. So you have the great men and great women now pontificate, make big statements and decisions. It's really essential to framing issues and galvanizing support and coming up with policies. But the implementation of these things is really very effective at grassroots level. And that's what people see. So when people see people working with one another to try to find solutions, it's catchy. The problem is it's difficult to do. There's not enough of it. And one of the challenges in the world is that there are a lot of wonderful individuals that are spurred on by the best of motivations to do things. But it's a challenge often to collectively pull these things together and have meaningful work at the bottom. But it needs to go on. So coming at it two ways. As citizens, particularly people in this group, you can't, and you certainly don't, wash your hands and say, hey, we've tried, we give up. The big guys have to figure this out, or got to keep working. How else is it going to work? In the back, in the middle, and I'll get over there. Go ahead.
My name is Ahmed Farzad. I'm a medical doctor. As the commander of Central Command in the Persian Gulf, you're fully familiar with the rulers of the Bahrain. It was in the news yesterday that they are going to put 47 physicians and nurses on trial for treating the injured. Every physician, including myself, we have to take the oath of Hippocratic oath of Maimonides, or according to 1964 Geneva Convention, it is physicians are obliged to take care of the injured and sick, regardless of any other factors.
Okay.
So
What's
I
the
am
question?
greatly dismayed
Okay.
the silence of the world community, especially the United States, in the face of such a violence, a violation of the human right of the physician and nurses.
Okay. Is there a question?
The question is, what do you think, since you were involved with these people?
Well, I was not involved in that before at all.
Yes.
So.
In general.
Yeah, I think I used the term clumsy earlier in the way in which the Bahraini government approached their challenge. I don't know the details of this, and I don't know how it's going to play out. It's easy to look at it from the outside with little knowledge of the facts and say, on the surface, which I would say on the surface it appears to be certainly not the right thing to do. That's my reaction, but I have to be honest, I don't know what really went on, and let's hope that maybe some light gets shed on this thing and they use their heads.
Yeah, let's say
just let me stop just for a second. I'm going to move on to some other questions, because this is typical of the kinds of stuff that goes on. People pick an issue, decidedly incorrect behavior in the opinions, I think, of the majority of people, and you just keep, we're not going to solve that problem. They're going to have to figure it out over there. I think that's one of the reasons the prince is here meeting with the leadership here in this country to kind of maybe get their heads straight. I know these people. I've dealt with them in the past. They've done some very, very good things, very helpful things to their own people and to others in the region. What was going on then is kind of mystifying, so hopefully they'll come to their senses and figure it out.
Hamid Lilou from U.S. Marine Corps Operation Cultural Learning in Dow in Quantico.
Tell me again the organization. You don't look like a Marine.
Yes,
You
I'm
dress
civilian.
far too casually.
Yeah, but
Your hair is a little long too.
I'm gonna.
All right,
adjust
sorry.
this
What's the question?
Now, Yeah, I work for U.S. Marine Corps Operational Cultural Learning Center.
So you're trying to put
It's-
culture in the Marine Corps? Are you kidding
Yes, operational culture.
me? How many Marines are here?
Operational culture, it's a TCOM, Training Education Command.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Since
You got a big job. Anyway, go ahead.
They're getting it. They're getting it.
Good.
Since U.S.-Iran relations are based on mutual misunderstanding,
Yeah.
in your opinion, if you had to profile Iranian negotiator, how would you describe them, and which advice would you give
Okay,
to
I
US
wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. I have no idea, and I would almost guarantee it'd be wrong if I picked it. Who knows? What we need is somebody, wherever they come from, that has a willingness to find a better solution than what we've been doing. And who, where, whatever they look like, however they came from, beats me.
And
I
a
don't know
short,
the
short
idea.
comment, you will be surprised, but frankly, as a Muslim, I wasn't aware of any struggle Shia Sunni until I came to the United States.
Okay?
I don't know why we're making a big deal about it.
Don't know. Sir?
There's one more question. We can go forever, but yeah, back to questions. Huh?
Sorry. Professor's looking for his coffee, so we're going to have to wind this up here pretty soon. Go ahead.
Hossein Shahbazi with Webster Universities. Thank you, Admiral, for your remarks. I want to ask you a question about actually in the context that you talk about the realities of today and also the problems that we have with our economies. I'm curious to get your view about the fact that U.S. Americans are about to leave Afghanistan. And we already know that Iran has huge interest and influence in Afghanistan. Along the same lines of logic that you presented, how come you don't see any priority for some kind of cooperation or relations or something that we can work out with the Iranians?
Regarding Afghanistan?
Yes, that they
Okay.
could help us to facilitate our
right.
departure from there.
Okay. First of all, departure, be careful. What's really meant, or to what extent. Personally, I think we ought to continue to have a strong relationship with the Afghan government and particularly the Afghan people. There's an awful lot of historical goodness that has happened, and I think we can still assist them in many ways. So let me tell you about my experiences with Iran in Afghanistan. So I saw. Typical of this relationship, both sides of the. Thank you very much. This is wonderful. A full professor, doctor, as an aide. I love it. Thanks very much. So here's what I saw in Afghanistan. The Iranians played both sides of the fence. Not surprising, I guess. It's probably human nature. Some things they did were particularly helpful. Other things, I'll guarantee you. I didn't like it at all, and I gave some pretty direct orders to deal with it. So the things they were doing were, on the one hand, actually helping people in Afghanistan, particularly in the West around Iraq, economically and infrastructure-wise. There were a lot of things that were really useful. I found the most consistent electricity out in Iraq, roads, good shape. Economy helped. People had enough food, most of it in trade back and forth. A very useful role. But the price of this was kind of high. On the other hand, when we had guys that were smuggling the most deadly kinds of parts for these improvised explosive devices, extremely deadly. Really.
Sudanese news. Just I want to ask you about Red Sea. It starts from Somalia, Yemen, Sudan, Egypt,
Djibouti, Eritrea.
Canal Suez. Because now everything, people, Egypt done, Mubarak gone, now Yemen half, and then Omar al-Bashir is gathering terrorists, all terrorists moved to Sudan. What I'm asking you about your recommendation, or how long you want Omar Bashir to stay in Sudan, start killing people in Darfur, Nuba Mountain, Abu Yay, gathering terrorists in the Red Sea. We have 6,000 miles.
What's the question?
How long you want to stay, Omar Bashir to stay in Sudan, killing
okay.
people every day?
Let me, thank you. Let me make another confession. While I was in command at CENTCOM, Sudan was certainly an issue. But my reality was I didn't have enough hours in the day to address the issue. So there was a concerted effort with this now not new administration in the U.S. to specifically try to help out in Sudan. In the old administration, the last administration, I tried to talk to the neighbors to see if there's something they might be able to do that could help. Some were helpful, but frankly, again, of all the things on the table, this one just frankly has not been high enough to really merit the kind of dedicated attention that it would probably take to solve it. Again, it gets back to common themes here around the world. Ethnic conflicts, religious conflicts, territorial conflicts, many of them that go back a long way. And the perception of neighbors in that what's in this for me, if this goes one way, this might be helpful. If it goes the other way, unhelpful, so they aid and abet these things. It's unfortunate. I think reality is folks are going to have to, you're probably going to be better off trying to get people in the neighborhood with a vested interest in the immediate vicinity to help than trying to get somebody here to weigh in from a couple thousand miles away with this much knowledge and experience in the area. Sorry, but I think it's just a practical response to the question. I think that's probably enough. I can see people starting to get squirmy and get out of here. So thanks very much for your attention.